For Kenora. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's great to see you in the chair again. I hope to be able to join you in Ottawa very soon. And it is an honor to be able to join the debate today on Bill C 230, dealing with a national strategy to redress environmental racism. Madam Speaker, preserving our natural environment is one of the most important issues of our time, as is building a more just society and supporting Canadians of all races and from all walks of life. I do want to start my remarks by saying that the people of the Kenora riding know the importance of our environment quite intimately, Madam Speaker. In Northern Ontario, hunting, fishing, and ecotourism more broadly is a part of our way of life, and it is a major driver of our economy. So we understand how essential it is for clean air, for clean water, and a vibrant natural environment now, but also preserved for future generations. Unfortunately, we have also seen firsthand how legacy failures by various governments have harmed the environment and the health and well-being of racialized people as well. After I was elected in 2019, I used my first intervention in this chamber to raise the issue of mercury poisoning in Grassy Narrows First Nation. Members of this nation, as well as White Dog in my riding, have been suffering the effects of mercury poisoning, muscle weakness, cognitive impairments, reduced vision, hearing, and speech for decades. And it wasn't until last year that this government finally signed an agreement for a treatment facility in these communities. In Grassy Narrows, both the communities' water systems were contaminated when toxic waste was dumped into the English and Wabigoon River system in the 1960s and 1970s, Madam Speaker. And in 2016, it was reported that the fish in Grassy Narrows specifically still had the highest levels of mercury contamination in the province of Ontario. This is perhaps the greatest example of environmental racism in Canada, and this government allowed it to continue for 5 years under their watch without action. Of course, we all also remember the Prime Minister's smug and condescending comments towards protesters of this injustice at a Liberal fundraiser in 2019. Madam Speaker, he thanked these individuals for their donation, without even attempting to address the real and urgent issues that they were hoping to bring to his attention. Contaminated or otherwise unsafe water is an unfortunate and unimaginable reality, yet it is the reality for many First Nations across the country. On March 1st, the Globe and Mail reported that 39 First Nations were under long-term boil water advisories. Several have gone without clean water for more than a decade, Madam Speaker. And last month, Niskantika First Nation, also in my riding, marked 26 years under a boil water advisory. Of course, you may recall last year, residents of this community actually had to evacuate entirely because there was a breakdown of their water system. This Liberal government promised that all long-term boil water advisories would be ended by March of this year. Of course, it is now March, and we know that they're not close to reaching that goal and have not even set a new date for when they hope to achieve that. Madam Speaker, the government has blamed their lack of progress on this file on the pandemic, but that excuse frankly does not add up. We know that they were on track to miss their timeline long before COVID-19 ever hit, and we also know that many Indigenous communities who have been incredibly diligent about fighting COVID-19 have nonetheless been finding ways to get essential work done on reserve while protecting the health and safety of their residents. Many Indigenous people across the country, and indeed all Canadians, do see this delay for what it is. The government once again putting their needs on the back burner. Madam Speaker, I truly worry about how continuing with the failures of the past will prevent us from securing a more prosperous future. And if the government is serious about addressing environmental racism, I suggest they place much more urgency on the issues of clean water in First Nations across the country. Madam Speaker, we also know that many Indigenous people, particularly those in remote and northern communities like those in my riding will be disproportionately impacted, I should say, by climate change. And ridings like mine will bear the brunt of many of those challenges. Remote communities face unique circumstances. Some of these challenges are related to their geography, of course, but many are also exacerbated by chronic underfunding, discriminatory legislation, and environmental neglect. In the past few years, residents of communities such as Bearskin Lake and Fort Hope First Nation in the riding of Kenora have been forced to evacuate due to floods and fires, respectively. These extreme events are expected in my region, Madam Speaker. However, they have been increasing in their frequency and severity in recent years. I also frequently hear concerns from residents of remote communities in the Kenora riding who rely on ice roads as a major transportation route for essential items. With shorter and milder winter seasons, as we just experienced this past year, it is limiting the ability for many to use these road systems, and it's cutting off many northern communities from vital resources. Residents of these communities are resilient, but their opportunities are often limited by insufficient infrastructure. Housing shortages, lack of transportation, and limited access to goods and services all have negative impacts on health, nutrition, financial security, as well as emergency response in the north. These issues will only get worse as the climate changes and weather patterns become even more erratic. Madam Speaker, Indigenous communities have been raising concerns about this for years, and I've been fighting since I was elected for real support in these areas. But the lack of action from this government has been disheartening. Barely anything has been done to address the current challenges remote communities face, let alone prepare them for the consequences of climate change. Madam Speaker, I do appreciate the very real and important issues that the member from Cumberland Colchester is aiming to address with this proposal. However, there are many questions that we still need answers to, such as how will we prepare remote communities to respond to natural disasters if they continue to increase in frequency? How will we support hunters and anglers in maintaining their traditional ways of life as ice thins and wildlife behavior changes? How will we ensure communities who rely on ice roads won't be cut off from the rest of the country when temperatures rise and winter seasons shorten? And how will we ensure houses and other facilities in these regions can withstand severe weather when the buildings they currently have are in advanced states of disrepair? These questions must be answered, and frankly, time is of the essence, Madam Speaker. We can and we must work to avoid the most devastating effects of climate change. We can invest in new technologies and work with industry to reduce emissions. We can support Canadians who want to practice sustainability in their daily lives, and we can take transformational actions, just as former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney did with regards to acid rain, to combat the environmental crises of our time. But we also need to do right, Madam Speaker, by the people who are already feeling the effects of environmental degradation. And I don't believe we, as Canadians, can trust the current Liberal government to do that. Because right now, the Liberal track record on these issues has been all talk and very little action. The Prime Minister committed to preserving our environment, reducing emissions, and bringing clean water to First Nations communities. But under his leadership, emissions have risen, critical habitat has been lost, and Indigenous communities are still underserved. How can anyone take this government at its word when their environmental record remains one of failure to back up their big promises with action? Madam Speaker, this government has had over 5 years to address these issues with meaningful legislation and tangible actions, but they have completely failed to do so. And their inaction has increased inequality, food insecurity, and negative health outcomes for Indigenous communities. We need to do better, and that is why Canada's Conservatives will continue to raise the voices of those that have been disproportionately impacted by these legacy government failures. Madam Speaker, I will end my remarks there. It has been a pleasure to be able to join this discussion today. Thank you.